Morning, guys. Welcome to the Media First webinar. This is the first webinar series, first of a series of webinars that we're going to be doing across the coming months. The plan is to do one a month, and we're going to cover a broad range of topics, including crisis management, message development, presentation skills. It's great to see so many familiar faces, or familiar names, I should really say, of our customers on this webinar. And to anybody that's new to Media First and who hasn't worked with us before, I just encourage you to go and have a look on the Media First website and sign up to the blog. We've got a lot of downloadable content on there, some ebooks, lots of blogs, and the team worked really hard to make those blogs as topical and relevant as possible, as you would expect. And frankly, they do a bloomin' marvelous job of it. I'd also encourage you all to go and check out the online-only training courses that we've recently launched. They start from as little as £50 per delegate, and everyone that's purchased them has said just how great they are and how helpful they've been. In fact, a bit later on during this webinar, we'll be giving you a discount code so that you can get 50% off the online crisis management course. So keep your eyes peeled for that, but you will have to hurry as the code will only last for 24 hours. Finally, I know a lot of you have been asking when we're going to be able to deliver face-to-face training again. And I'm pleased to say that from May onwards, we are reopening our TV and our radio studios and our training rooms here and heading back out to clients' offices to deliver training again. We've worked hard to make this COVID safe, and we've put a lot of measures in place to achieve this. But don't worry though, we're still going to continue with the online training and the Zoom-based training that we've been delivering for the last 12 months, as we know that many of you are really benefiting from this and enjoying the benefits of practicing this different form of communication and down the line interviews. So back to this webinar series. We want this to be as interactive as possible, guys. So please do ask any questions using the Q&A section that you'll find on your screen. And even if you don't have a question you personally want to ask, just dive into that section. You'll be able to see the questions that other people are asking, and you can vote by clicking on the thumbs up to see which questions you want us to answer first. And when we get to the end of the webinar, we'll answer some of those questions. Right, then, as you would expect, many of the hosts for this webinar series will be from our stable of current working journalists, who are also our media and communications trainers. So, first of the trainers to take to this virtual stage is Kami Inzeram. Kami is a familiar face on television news, having worked for ITV News and Channel 4 for over 2 decades. He's reported throughout the pandemic for Channel 4 News, and in his extensive broadcasting career, Kami has held roles with as Washington correspondent and also as many news anchors. He's also covered a huge number of international and domestic news stories, including winning the RTS Foreign News Award. Kami is also a standout media trainer, someone whose sharp intelligence is only matched by his charm. He's worked with many of our clients to help them hone and test their proactive and reactive messaging and give their spokespeople the confidence and the skills to make the most of their meetings with journalists. So, Kami, welcome to the stage.
James, thank you very much indeed for that very, very warm welcome. It's very nice to be here today and talking to all of you about the work we've been doing and to get some really, really useful insights from 2 really fascinating guests that I want to introduce. Firstly, Helen Robinson-Gordon, who is the head of news and media at the British Medical Association, the BMA. Unsurprisingly, they have had quite some year. Helen has been the head of media and news at the BMA since 2018. Her background is health and public policy. Before working for the BMA in a previous career, she worked for the BBC as a journalist. So guess what? She also has a really good insight and understanding of that relationship between journalists and PR professionals. And given the year that they've had, I can't wait to hear from you, Helen, in a moment, and get some of the inside stories of what it's been like to be at the coal face of, let's face it, the biggest story that any of us can remember in living memory, really. And I mean, it's been a 12-month rolling crisis, hasn't it? So we'll come to you shortly, and I'm sure what you have to share will be useful for people across sectors, many levels of seniority in many different roles. I also want to introduce Tini Lubster, who's going to be joining us. Tini Lubster is the Director of Organizational Development at the BCF. The BCF provide accredited coaching and management training courses. And Tini's going to talk to us really specifically about how you cope with the pressures that we all know have been so high on our teams and on our colleagues during this last year. Burnout is a real thing, and Tini's got some really great tips on how to help everybody in your team through these extended periods of uncertainty and stress and pressure. Before we get to that, though, I just want to share with you a glimpse of the world through the BMA's eyes over the last incredible and really demanding and difficult year.
This is unlike anything doctors have experienced in recent times.
Welcome back.
Welcome back. You're watching Sky News Tonight.
From the British Medical Association.
Thank you for joining us this morning, Doctor. Good afternoon to you.
Very good to talk to you both.
Dr. Richard Fultree is chair of the British Medical Association's
General Practitioners Committee. He joins me now from Leeds.
Good to see you this morning. Joining me now is chair of the British Medical Association,
Dr. Chand Nagpal.
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 Alan Wilson.
Dr. David Strain. Dr. George Ray.
Dame Parveen Kumar.
And joins me now.
So I guess it's fair to say, Helen, that when journalists like me, when the media want to speak to a doctor, they don't ring the doctors, they ring you, don't they? So just give us the kind of big picture and explain how much busier your world became in March last year, or perhaps it was earlier when we first began to hear of this pandemic that was coming our way.
Thank you very much, Jimmy. I guess it probably was March when it really began to pick up and take off, and it wasn't gradual. It was almost like a tsunami overnight. We went from, half a dozen or a few more inquiries, journalists kind of asking a little bit about it, particularly when some of the first cases were diagnosed, to it just suddenly exploding. A very quick snapshot I could share with you is that on average, the BMA will have about 12,500 media hits across a year. That has grown steadily since I joined the BMA, but that's generally what we'd expect to get. In 2020, we got just shy of 44,000. So that gives you a sense of what our workload looked like. Just simply year on year, it was unbelievable.
A 400% increase in inquiries.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
So, I mean, what kind of stress and pressure has that put on you? Because people are coming to doctors, they're looking to doctors for information, for reassurance, for insight, because this has affected all of us so very deeply.
I think personally, it's probably aged me by about 10 years. Which I'll never get back, but I think it's a crisis that we had no sense of how long it was going to last for. And I think looking back, I wished in some ways I had fully understood, or we had fully understood, that it was going to go on for as long as it had, because the impact on myself and the team, in fact, the whole of the BMA, has been incredible, very, very stressful, very, very difficult at times. And I think we just didn't probably understand that it was going to be quite as long and intense as it has. And to go from being an already busy, popular newsroom with lots of daily interactions with journalists, both regional, national and international, to an absolute unending barrage of calls all the time, 24/7. Took quite some dealing with, I have to say.
Because very, very few organizations have ever had to deal with anything as unending as this. And it's made you, I guess, have to look at your wider crisis planning and think, well, you know what, we do need to be prepared for something to last much, much longer than the usual 2 or 3 day, or in the worst case scenario until this, maybe a crisis would last 2 weeks. But this is a completely different magnitude, isn't it?
It is a completely different magnitude. And I think in some ways it throws perhaps most crisis plans out of the window. I mean, I would hazard a guess to say that most organizations somewhere have a crisis management plan of some kind, be it gathering dust on the shelf, or be it something that people, regularly update and look at. And I guess in my lifetime, my experience, most of the crises I have managed and been through, quite rightly, as you said, they've lasted a day, 2 days, a week, maybe a month at the most, but generally they've had an initial busy period, the shock, the crisis, the horror, maybe whatever it is, then a kind of how to manage it, and then a recovery period, and then it begins to tail off, and you look back and learn from that. COVID hasn't been like that. COVID has just been full on from day one, and we quickly realised that the crisis planning that we had wasn't fit for purpose. It wasn't going to give us the support that we needed, and so it was beginning to develop a new plan almost as we were working through the crisis that we were in. And I think the one thing I learned was, think very quickly about new ways of working. You have to do.
So talk us through those early realizations that you were going to have to do things differently. What were the first things that you introduced that were, a new solution to an incredibly different situation?
The first thing was to get more staff in. The team just simply wasn't big enough. We went into COVID already with a vacancy. That was just as it was. It was just unfortunate that we already had a vacancy in the team. And we quickly realised that there's no way we were going to cope with the numbers of the people we had in the team. So the first thing we did was look to bring in a PR agency that provided us with a mixture of, bums on seats, for want of a description. So they were just that some of them were just there to simply, triage the calls as they came in, help us with the commentary, help us with setting up interviews, and just kind of triaging and planning the day. Others from the agency provided slightly more longer term and strategic advice. So that was an initial step that we took, but it wasn't something that was going to sustain us for a great amount of time. And we also quickly realised that perhaps some of the ways of the agency working weren't quite what the BMA wanted. So the next thing was to bring in people on staff in a more permanent manner. So since it was about May, I think we brought the first person in, and since May we've increased the numbers of the team on 6 months and longer contracts. So they're now part of the team, they're on staff, and they understand, learning the BMA ways of working, which again is not, is not easy. It's a very big, it's a very complex organisation.
And I can imagine that getting bums on the seats might, not without its challenges, but is relatively straightforward. But strategic assistance, given that you're managing so many nuances, you're a big tent and doctors have different views within, and having another organization trying to help you, doing their best to help you with strategic vision, that probably brings its challenges as well.
It does, and we had to learn as an organisation how to, or as a media team and at other parts of the BMA, how to get on with an external body that we hadn't had that relationship before. We've never needed that relationship. relationship, because one thing about the BMA is, as a directorate, we are about 80 strong, and that includes internal communications, stratcoms, web work, digital, social media. We're a big in-house team, so we rarely need to go out and bring in external agencies. So it was a very new way of working for us, which also, as you say, did bring with its challenges, which weren't always easy, I have to say, at times to cope with.
Sure. And taking that into account and taking into account all the difficulties that you were managing, was there a moment that stands out for you as the most challenging, and how did you deal with it?
I think the most challenging was when we realized that we had to just very quickly find new ways of working. And we'd had lots of very, very positive media coverage. I think the one thing I would say is we've got some really good, strong working relationships with journalists. And I think that's one thing that stood us in good stead. And I really look back on that and think I'm so glad that we do have those regular conversations with a lot of journalists, so that they knew us and knew where we were coming from, and we were able to have some difficult conversations with them at times. But we'd had an awful lot of really, really good media coverage. And there was one particular day when a decision had been made to go with a story that ended up being on the front page of the Sunday Telegraph. And the following morning, there was quite a bit of criticism from within the BMA. There was quite a large number of members of the BMA who felt that that was the wrong direction to have gone in, and we shouldn't have waded into that particular argument. And it was a decision that had been supported and promoted by the PR agency as a way to go, and there had been a lot of reservation at the time. And the following one, there was quite a lot of criticism, both of the media team and of others in the BMA. And for me, that was probably a really, really difficult time, because it just felt, it kind of felt very personal. And just because of all the stress we were under, it just felt like, we're doing all this good work, and the one thing you find is one decision that hadn't even been ours, but had been a controversial one at best. And I think that was probably really the most difficult time. And it was about, the story was about whether we felt it was right for schools to reopen in June.
Right.
Last June.
So a very divisive topic, and as an organisation where you have views across the board. I mean, in a sense, these strategic pivots and decisions are things that you have to take anyway as an organisation, but during a time of crisis, they are so much more acute. And I guess if there's one learning point, it is trust your own instincts. Your brand. Yeah.
And I think sometimes you forget that in the heat of battle, but it's actually to trust the relationships we have, the people that we know, and to also recognize when fatigue and stress is beginning to get the better of you, and not be afraid to say we need to work in a different way. And we quickly started to do that, and that's made a big difference.
How did the fatigue and the stress affect the team, and how did you manage that?
I think it affected us in the sense that at first we were, as all good PR teams will be, you as media teams, you want to do your best, you want to work as hard as you can, you want to deliver the results, you want to give it your all, and we absolutely did. I think actually what we should have done was not all of us give it our all the time. And looking back, we should have probably, if we could, as soon as we began to get more staff, perhaps stage it a little better. I have I have quite a young team. They are brilliant. They are amazingly talented, amazingly enthusiastic. Their knowledge is brilliant, but they are still young. And I think for them, the mental toll of being faced with such an enormous task day in and day out was very telling. One of the things that we did, and because we also have on call, so we have an on-call service, and again, that suddenly became like business as usual. It wasn't just the odd phone call in the evening or the weekend. It was working 7 days a week, 24/7.
And I can see lots of the questions are coming in, and I think we're going to hear from a lot of people who want to know a bit more about how you fine-tune processes. But if I can ask, the most obvious one, you were of course all working remotely as well. It just added a whole nother layer of complication. So how did you deal with that on the kind of the range of options from micromanaging people to empowering them to take responsibility. How did you navigate that?
You're right. We all were working remotely, and again, that had been something that the BMA had done a lot of planning for. And what was going to be a test day for everybody to say, right, on this particular day, everybody's going to work from home and see if the IT that we've set up works, if it all fits in. And in actual fact, we never went back to the office. So again, there was I think for quite a few people, was quite a bit of trauma around that, because what we thought was a day of testing before we all went back to work in the office became never going back to the office again. And that was the 17th of March last year. So, many of us now have not been to the office on anything like a permanent basis since. So we were already suffering that, if you like, as a trauma or a change of working. But I think we did it by having regular morning catch-ups. So every single morning without fail, we have a half an hour catch-up between us as a team, and then there's bigger departmental meetings. And for me, it was just saying to the team every day, how are you? How is it looking today? How are you feeling? And having a really good, strong degree of honesty between all of us to be able to say, it's not that great, or actually I'm fine. And trusting my team, because they have a portfolio, so each of them have an area of specialism, and trusting their instincts and their relationships with those doctors and with those journalists to deliver the best output.
Sure. And that key point of trusting your team, checking in with them, thanking them for good work is so important when people are working so hard. Looking back now, what do you wish you had done earlier?
Taking a sabbatical? No, I'm not supposed to say that. No, I think brought people in earlier, and being probably more assertive in saying, look, we need to work differently. Stop trying to work within the confines of the way the organisation was used to working, and almost throw out the rule book and just say, look, this is actually what we need. Please listen to us, and stop trying to kind of fit the crisis around the parameters that the organisation might have worked with, because they were not going to work anymore. So
internal comms are really important as well then?
Internal comms and the communication. So, for example, a lot of our support services, so maybe our IT, our HR, their lives obviously had changed, but they weren't working in the way and at the level that we were. So it was trying to have those engaging conversations saying, look, I know you're doing this, but actually for us, it looks like this now. And I really need you to do something in a different way for me to make it work more quickly.
Because you can't assume that everybody in the organization is having the same experience.
No, and I quickly realized that they weren't. Absolutely, they weren't. And that's not right or wrong. It's just a different experience.
One of the things that I think has challenged a lot of leaders has been, so taking your example of having to onboard new people because you need to grow the team. How do you do that effectively when you can't get together in the way that we're used to?
That has been challenging. I think the one thing I would say is pick the new people very carefully. It's very easy in a crisis to say, oh my God, you're free. Yes, you're a freelance, PR person or whatever, just come in and help us. But actually that's not the right way. You've got to pick the right people and pick them very carefully to make sure that they will fit in with the team and have got some background or some experience in this sort of environment that they're going to work in. And just make sure that you have the ways of doing things easy for them to follow. So as an example, we publish all our press releases via something called Golkana. It's a bit clunky. It's not the best way of doing it, but it's how we do it. So again, just make sure that the way that you do that is really easy for them to find and you can explain it, because they're not going to have the luxury. Normally an induction at the BMA is done over 3 or 4 weeks. That was condensed down to, like this. So just make sure that the things that they absolutely have to do, the processes are as easy to follow and easy to find, and you make sure you devote some time to help them and support them so that they feel integrated. And again, bringing them into morning meetings. The other thing I've continued to do is have one-to-ones with my team. That's something I'd always done anyway, but we've continued those through the crisis, even though they might be a lot shorter than they were. I still have regular one-to-ones with them via, we use Teams, so we do that as well.
Now we've spoken an awful lot, and we haven't got much time left, unfortunately. We've spoken a lot about process and management, but one of the things we talk about, and you've sat in on during media training courses with the people that actually end up having to speak to people like me, is we talk about the role of compassion and care in a crisis scenario. Typically, that is when your organization is in a crisis situation to some extent of your own making. COVID was not that. We looked to doctors because you were going to save us. But I wonder if there were moments when you felt that you had been criticized, that doctors were being criticized, and you had to think carefully about your tonal response to make sure that people really understood what you were going through, but at the same time, you were able to illustrate your own commitment to the healthcare system and looking after people. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think there are times when the BMA is the trade union for doctors, but it's also a professional association. Sometimes those two areas can be uneasy bedfellows. And I think from the trade union perspective, it was very easy at times to get blinkered into the very difficult time that doctors and nurses were having, the amount of stress they were under, the amount of hours they were doing, which is all true. And they were, and they worked under some of the most appalling conditions. It is horrific. But also so the patients and their patients' families. And the one thing I always say is when we're looking to do briefings for interviews, it's not just about you, it's about the patients you're caring for and their families. And we always try and instill that so that it doesn't come across as, oh, poor doctor all the time, because it's actually poor a lot of people. And again, if there was, if we were veering into discussions around pay and remuneration, we were very careful to remember that actually there's a lot of people who've lost everything. They have no income coming in at all. So you're always mindful of the context that you're talking.
And trying to manage and trying to manage the criticisms that might come out. Doctors are very well paid, etc.
Yeah, absolutely.
Helen, thank you so much for those fascinating insights. Could you perhaps just summarize then 2 or 3 top tips for your colleagues in the comms industry? What would you urge them to think about and prepare for in the event that another big crisis comes along that they find themselves part of?
Is your team big enough to cope? Could you cope with a doubling or trebling overnight of your workload? Are all your processes easily accessible and up to date? So can you find all your how to do things? And if you have to share it with other people, is it really easy to do? And just remember to be caring and compassionate. And it's okay to say, actually, I'm really stressed, I'm not having a good time, and therefore maybe find new ways of either giving people time off or time to step back and step down.
So important that remembering to thank your team part, because if you lose them, then you're going to lose the comms battle as well. They are your they're your holy grail, really. And some of the other things I just noted down as you were speaking, don't underestimate how long a crisis can go on for. As you said, bring in new resource, internal comms, make sure people understand the pressure that the comms team is under. And if you need to develop new processes internally for sign off, for recruitment, for communications, then these things need to be done. And it is better to think about that before than during, even though you will cope.
And I think the final thing as well is, we've got some really well-trained, media spokespeople that we give them briefings as well, but they've also been trained. It's just have a think about that training. Are they well-trained? Could they do the refresher? It might only be an hour, it might only be half an hour. It might be, another full day or half-day course, with an organisation like Media First. But just kind of think about, who are my spokespeople and are they absolutely where I need them to be?
Helen Robinson-Gordon, thank you so much for all those.
Thank you very much.
And I hope you'll hang around to talk to people a bit later.
I will.
Shortly, we will also hear from James, who introduced the session. One of the things that Helen mentioned, of course, a moment ago was the importance of developing good relationships and managing those relationships with journalists, because when times are good, you still need them on sides. When times are difficult, you really need to be able to have good discussions with people so they really understand your organizational perspective. We will also hear from Tini Lubster about how to look after your team. We will be joined again by James in a moment. Please stay with us.
Media First. We're specialists in communication training. We help our clients with all of their communication challenges. In the last 5 years alone, we've trained over 10,000 people across 45 different sectors. Yes, we're known for delivering high-quality, bespoke media training, but there's so much more to Media First. Want to train 50 people in 3 hours to be more compelling communicators? No problem. What if you need to help 200 people manage the early stages of a media crisis, but they're based in 15 different countries? We'll get them together using the latest online technology. Maybe you want to help your senior management team deliver their personal brand, get them to be more engaging with their presentations, or even during team meetings. We can do that. Oh, and social media, we're across that too. Whether you're at the start of your social media journey and need help with strategy, or just want to create some standout content.
Before Media First, I would use lots of different agencies and it required a lot of briefing. It meant that I'd be getting in different people for the PR media, different people for speech training, different people for the internal comms and HR training, and it was onerous. So it was great to find Media First. You can throw any communications challenge at them and they'll come up trumps.
All of our training is completely bespoke, designed by dedicated account managers and delivered by outstanding communication coaches, journalists and trainers. Media First. We're not just a media training company, we're specialists in communication training.
There we go. James.
Hi, Jamie.
So
That was great. Can we keep Helen on for longer?
We may need to. I mean, I could have kept going. I had so many other questions, and it's so interesting hearing from somebody who really has been in the thick of it.
Yeah, I think we'll do a follow-up with all of the questions that we've got, and we'll see if we can, because I'm not sure we're going to get through all of them by the end of this, but we'll make sure that we try and answer them at some point somehow.
Good, and perhaps those answers can be put out in a mail shot or something.
Yeah, sure.
Look, James, you've run Media First for, what is it, a decade now, an organization that in itself has been around for 40 years. You talk to media professionals, heads of comms, directors of news all the time. And this year has seen so many changes in the way that interviews are done and ergo training as well. What are people telling you at the moment? What's going on out there?
Yeah, it's God, yeah, it has. It's been one hell of a year, hasn't it, for everybody? But specifically from a training perspective, I think if you'd have said to me 2 years ago that you will be delivering 50 plus courses a month online via Zoom or Teams or video conferencing, I'd have said that you were crazy, and I'd have also said that it's just not the best way of doing training. Face-to-face training is the best approach.
But now that we are doing it online,
yeah,
of course, interviews are done online now. That's everybody has a TV studio in their front room.
Yeah, and that would have always been my argument. We prided ourselves at Media First on making sure that our training's as realistic as possible. So that means having this setup here and having a radio studio upstairs and access to other studios and an off-site telephone journalist, and a camera technician who is ensuring that the journalist tutors, people like you, are able just to focus on the delegate and the spokesperson and give them the most practical experience possible. But it's that realistic bit that's changed. Now the most realistic form of interview is down the line. It's this type of interview. And as a consequence of that, you have to say that there's a really strong argument behind delivering training virtually, in this down the line format. I think, it's going to change. We are going to go back to face, and I'm delighted that we are doing that, because it's frankly really nice to be able to build those connections with people. And, there's a lot of nuances amongst the training that we do, and it's great to be in a room and to see that. So from May on, we are opening up, and the studios will be open again, and we'll be going out to clients' premises and delivering training on site. But it's certainly going to be much more of a blended approach, with maybe a bit of both, on each course. It might be a case that we need to have this type of interview set up on our normal, if you like, media training courses, which are delivered in person.
And of course, it will depend on what people want, because there are still lots of people who are understandably cautious and nervous and aren't necessarily going to want to go out.
Completely. And that's another advantage to having those different approaches is that, the people who aren't comfortable to do it in person, we can do it online. And there's also some advantages for people who, media training is you kind of wear your heart on your sleeve when you do media training. You're put front and center amongst all of your colleagues, and that can sometimes be quite tough for people. And if you're quite an introverted character, maybe they feel more comfortable doing that online. They're amongst all of their kind of own possessions, if you like, and they're at home, and they feel more relaxed and they're more able to be involved. So there's advantages depending upon the type of character as well. And it's about picking the right approach for training for the right person, really.
And I just wanted to pick up on something that Helen mentioned, that you're planning another one of these webinars on how to develop good relationships with journalists.
Yeah, we are. And I'm so pleased to see one of the questions from someone, I'm not sure who it was, I'm just scrabbling to see the screen. Emily, thank you very much, Emily, for asking this question. Your question was, catch-up drinks with journalists seem to be a thing of the past, sadly. Any tips on building relationships with journalists? The next webinar is going to focus on that topic. We're going to have Sean Ryan, who is Director of Comms for Save the Children. And Sean is also an outstanding journalist, 20 years as various editorial roles at the Times Group, so editor of the Sunday Times, for example. And Sean will be talking to us about how he's built relationships, which has been and beginning to rebuild Save the Children, if you like, after the turbulent crisis that
they had their, like a lot of third sector organizations of late, they've had their own challenges. So it'll be fascinating to hear from him. James, thank you very much indeed, and we'll be hearing from you again later. But now I wanted to hear from Tini Lubster, who, as I mentioned, is the Learning and Development Director for the BCF Group, who deliver coaching, accredited and bespoke coaching, management leadership training across a whole range of organizations and industries. I'll name a few: Baxter Story, Pink News, London Irish Rugby, so sport as well. And you work with the petrochemical industry. I mean, is there anybody that you don't work with?
I follow Richard Branson, say yes, and then work out how you're going to help people out.
And look, one of the things that is common across any organization, any industry, when difficult times approach, what we would call a crisis, is burnout. It's staff and team burnout, spokesperson burnout, which of course we've heard from Helen about how that impacted her team. What can you share with us about how to manage burnout and how to help colleagues through difficult times?
Yeah, and I love the words Helen used, caring and compassion, because it all boils down to getting to that space. When we think of the stockbrokers on the stock floor exchanging, selling, buying on a daily basis, it's a constant humming of your adrenaline that kicks in, and you can anticipate burnout based on that. On a football pitch, it's a spurt of the moment where the adrenaline kicks in, and you manage that, and it's more physical exhaustion rather than mental exhaustion. And in the communications industry, it's that slow burn of tension, because I'm crisis managing, I'm working out, I'm not sleeping, I'm responding late because it's global hours. So it's a slow burn, and burnout creeps up on you. And what I use Dress with 1S to help me with burnout. Have a discussion with your line manager. To Helen's point, have an honest, open discussion and say, I'm struggling at the minute. Things are getting on top of me. I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed about things. And it's, based on the relationship you have with your line manager, but have that discussion, relax, and have relaxing activities. Go and rake the leaves in your garden. I call those my tap out moments. Take 15 minutes
and they're the things that are so easy to not do. They're not
exactly.
I've got too much to do. I'm not going to go for a walk around the park.
No, and your partner moans, "Oh, the dishes are piling up in the." Go and wash the dishes. What that does takes your mind into a different space. You will then subconsciously solve a problem for yourself. How many times have you gone to bed at night and worried about something, and when you woke up in the morning, bing, that's what I'm going to be doing about this. And your subconscious mind just triggers that for you. The E and the S from Dress with 1S is exercise and sleep. And it's just even getting off and doing a 500-meter walk, walk around your house in a format that you feel comfortable with. And then sleep, obviously, what I did when I was in quite a stressful moment in North America, I had a notepad next to my bed, and the stuff that woke me at night, I just wrote on that notepad.
And then you've expunged it.
And then I've taken it out of my head, and so I can go back to dreamland.
And so if there's some of the things that we can do for ourselves, what do we do as leaders? Where does positive reinforcement come into this, for example?
Yes. So identify that someone is stressed, and there's a few things that would trigger that for you. Lack of concentration, someone responds to something emotionally in quite an intensive way, and their triggers are gentle. In other words, they get emotional or get angry quite quickly. And subconsciously, people feel alienated and display alienation. So if you as a leader can identify those things, have a discussion with your team. And to Helen's point, having a young team, give them permission to take 60 minutes and go for a walk. I had a guy
build that into the way that work is done.
Build that into the way that you talk to them. And I had a guy in Birmingham working in an engineering firm. They got a big Rolls-Royce contract, and there's other brands out there. Excuse me, punting them. His team was a young team, and he said to them, "You know what, guys? Today's Monday morning. I'll field the phones. You guys take the morning off. Go have a cup of tea together." All hands on deck. The leader rolls up their sleeves and supports the team and takes on some of the pressure. And you build up currency and credibility with your team in that way, and therefore your one-on-ones become a bit more in-depth conversations. Things that get revealed, you can help your team and support your team.
And what about the role of coaching in leadership? How can you build coaching skills into the manager's toolkit, if you like?
Yeah, and so everybody thinks coaching is this big I am, and coaching is a technique you use when you communicate with your team. And whether you're performance managing or setting and managing expectations or just having a general conversation with your team, as soon as you start asking questions and show an interest in the individual that you're talking to and actively listen to what it is that they're saying and not just waiting for the gap to respond or to tell them what to do, as soon as you ask those questions, you're starting to empower them. And as soon as you empower someone else, you get a increased performance from them. Their motivation increased because they feel, oh, I can get this right. I can do this. You also, through coaching, decrease your footfall to your door. In a sense, my tip is, if someone comes to you and is asking you, oh, what should I do here? Or how do we solve this? Just ask 3 questions. Tell me what the situation you find yourself in. If you were going to solve it for yourself, what would you be doing? And what's holding you back?
Mm.
And those are the 3 questions. Just ask them as they come towards you. Next time, they might ask those questions to themselves and say, oh, you know what? I thought through what you were asking me. This is what I think we should be doing. Is this the right thing?
And that segues very well with the insights Helen shared with us around empowering your staff. We've hired you because we trust you. We will give you the support mechanisms and the information you need to make good decisions, but you're going to make the decisions.
Yes. And as she was talking about bringing support in, it's that whole conversation about setting and managing expectations so that everybody's on board and knows the rules of engagement clearly.
Tini, thank you so much. Fascinating hearing about how to approach management in a constructive and an expansive way, even when times are difficult, or perhaps particularly when times are difficult, because it's even more important then that our processes and our management is really focused on getting the best out of people. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Kenny.
We have loads of questions coming in. So James, I think it's back to you, isn't it, to run through some of the topics people have raised.
It is, Tinny. Yeah, I'm just going to have to lean forward a little bit, guys, to be able to see these questions. Thank you ever so much for all these questions. As I said a moment ago, I think we are going to have to take some of these offline. But Tomo, if you can scroll to the top, mate, so that I can see the ones that have been upvoted the most. So the first one was Emily, as I said, about catch-up drinks with journalists seeming like a thing of the past. Kami, what's your thoughts on that? You know, that kind of relationship building piece with journalists and how we're going to be able to do that.
Yeah, it's so important because, you know, and I'm sure Helen would agree with this, the world of difference between a mail shot press release that goes out to the ether, you have no idea if anyone's read it. The difference between that and calling either a planning editor or, you know, if it's a longer term piece, or a journalist that you know because you've worked with them before, and say, you know, look, we've got this thing, I'm working on this, are you interested? If you were to be, if you're half interested but need something more, what would that thing be? These relationships take time to curate, and the more back and forth you can invest in, the more likely you are going to get the stories that you want. Helen, what would you think?
Go for it.
I think it's really important to have those conversations. So we will talk to the journalists, you know, that we have a kind of our cohort, if you like, of our main team of journalists, probably once or twice a week. And certainly we don't just simply send out a press release. We will ring the journalists where we want them to see it and say, look, this is what I'm thinking about. With some of the more trusted ones, we'll even send them an early draft and say, this is our line of thinking. Are you interested in it? What do we need to do? Can we work with you? So that's how we work. Again, with our regional news desks, we've got some really good, strong working relationships with all the regional news desks as well, to get them to buy in if it's a story that's relevant to a local area or certain regions. So it's really just about maintaining those conversations, maintaining that chat. And I understand, I mean, obviously at the moment there's little or no face-to-face, and I appreciate, you know, having a drink or a cup of coffee seems quite old-fashioned, but I still think it's important, and it's something that we still do, and I encourage my team to do. They will each meet with 3 or 4 journalists on a monthly basis and have a chat with them about what we might be planning, what we're thinking about, what's on their mind. You know, particularly with the main health leaders and the main health correspondents, so that we've got a sense of what they're going to like. So, for instance, I would, you know, generally have a vague idea of what Hugh Payment, the BBC, might pick up, what Sophie Borland at the Mail might be interested in. And I also know what Sophie Borland at the Mail would be interested in, what I would not like her to be interested in. So, you know, it always works that way as well. And again, you know, Dennis Campbell at the Guardian, it's just having that sense of what are they going to pick up, what they're going to like. And that just comes from, you know, regular conversations with them, definitely.
What I'm hearing there, Helen, is that it's about making it a two-way conversation as well. It's not about you broadcasting to the journalists. It's about you engaging with them and truly understanding what it is that they want to hear from you.
Yeah.
How have you found, Helen, over the last year, we've found that there's definitely advantages in the way that we've been able to build relationships with our clients by Zoom, because there are some clients that we've never met. We don't meet with these guys in person sometimes, but we've now obviously been talking to them more on Zoom, and so we've got a sense of who they are and what makes them tick and what they're into, and so we found that really quite helpful at times. How have you found that with journalists? Has there been any elements of that?
Yeah, I think so, and I think there's been a lot of learning and understanding, and forgiveness if sometimes Zoom interviews haven't gone very well. I think one thing we did was invest in, for our main spokespeople, just invest in making sure that their positions were good, that their cameras were good, that they had everything needed to try and do as good an interview as possible. We sent out some early do's and don'ts of what not to have behind you, what to have behind you, how to make the house quiet. I think we've probably relaxed a little bit more as the time's gone on. I think the idea of somebody coming in behind you isn't as kind of, oh my God, that's really awful, that can't happen. But still having good lighting, good sound quality, and a pleasing background. And it's not always 100% successful, but we try to do it. So we've tried to give our spokespeople as many tools as they need to make sure that their interviews work well and they know what to say. And also with the journalists, if we've still been able to do face-to-face interviews, although socially distanced, we've tried to achieve that where we, very much so where we can. But it has at times been difficult because you just can't have that kind of nuanced conversation, that kind of like, stepping in and going, not sure about that question, or, you can have those sort of to and fro and back and forth, that some of that's gone. So it has been difficult at times.
A question here from Linda Feely. Thanks very much. Good to see you. How did you manage your spokesperson availability and the engagement when they were working doctors? And that kind of applies to most industries. With senior spokespeople are often senior people. They're obviously very busy dealing with COVID. How are you? How did you manage that? And what advice do you have for other organisations, either in the healthcare sector or outside?
I think that can be difficult because obviously you can't take them away from, literally the doctors working on the front line. I think for us it falls into two camps. So a lot of our spokespeople, so for instance, Dr. Nagpal, Chan Nagpal, who is the chair, he spends more time at the BMA than he does as a GP. So he's paid, he's paid to be at the BMA and he devotes his time, as do some of our other branches of practice chairs. So they have a backfill in their hospital or in their GP practice for the numbers of days or number of hours they give the BMA. So that can be a little bit easier because they're using BMA time, if that's the right word. Where we're going to our more elected members are our frontline doctors who aren't as involved in the day-to-day running of the BMA. That's always a challenge, and we say to the journalists, you've got to give us as much notice as you can. We will do our best, but we tend to try and work with the doctors and find a time that's good for them. And again, most of the GP practices or the trusts, are supportive because what they're saying is relevant to not just themselves, but the wider the wider directorate and the wider field. But I think it's just about saying to journalists, don't be afraid to say to journalists, look, no, I can't get you a doctor in 40 minutes. That's just not going to happen. I'm sorry, it's not possible. But maybe if you give me 2 hours, we can. And again, it's that having the relationship. So we try and get the journalists to come to us a couple of days in advance if they want something very specific. If they want, I don't know, they want an anaesthetist in Manchester. I can't just do that like that, but give me a day or a couple of days and I probably can. So the quick response tends to be our senior elected members who are paid to be at the BMA, and they're still working doctors, but they're more of the times at the BMA. The ones that are more of the co-face, we always say to journalists, just give us a bit more time.
Thanks, Helen. Kami, I've got a question here for you from Andrew Duggan. Andrew's popped a couple of questions in here, but the one that I'm going to pick up on, if you don't mind, Andrew, is your second one, which is self-filmed video footage has always been valuable for eyewitness accounts for major events, but do you think the last year has made media outlets more welcoming of self-filmed footage for other more business as usual pieces?
That's fascinating. And actually, it's a question about ethics and compliance. If somebody witnesses something terrible, then they are doing the job of the journalist, if you like, and we are trusting them to bring us information and material. When you're talking about a person in authority, like a doctor, it really depends what kind of self-film material you're talking about. If it's, look, this is the reality of life on a COVID ward, and we all know that it's just not safe to have more people in there. So if a doctor is willing to share that with us, that becomes really, really valuable and really interesting. Clearly, there are some quality challenges there if we're going to then turn that, rather than being an interview as such, but turn that into a filmed piece where we're transporting the person on their sofa into the, the phrase Helen used, the coalface. It would be helpful for that doctor or whoever it is to work with the TV producer to understand the kind of stuff that we need filmed to make it work. Now, if what we're talking about is an accountability interview, so for example, at the moment, there is a trend with a number of police forces to film themselves giving a statement about whatever it is that may or may not have gone wrong. Well, what that does is it prevents independent journalists from scrutinizing what they say. Now, at the moment, generally, doctors have saved us. They are, and we trust them. But there may be times when something may have gone wrong and there is criticism that needs to be justifiably put before them, because these are the things that the public want and deserve to be asked. And in that circumstance, a self-filmed interview would not be appropriate, and it would be unlikely that a broadcaster would use it. Helen, I'd be interested in your view on that.
Yeah, I agree. We don't often get asked for responses to be filmed in that way. We do get lots and lots and lots of requests to film in GP practices, film on a ward, and particularly, and the answer to generally most of that is no. We would always try and work with a film crew to bring them and allow them to do it. Partly because you say you get the impartiality, you get the filming that the film crew wants rather than maybe what the doctor wants to, or the nurse, whoever it wants to show. But that has happened more and more. I agree, if you're filming something like life on a COVID ward, again, that's not without its legal challenges and parameters and approvals and all sorts of things that we have to work through to get. But that can be genuinely realistic and on the ground, and it's good to have. But I can't ever remember a time when we've offered a comment from a doctor filmed and sent to a broadcaster or a radio station, because we know the journalists, and I know as a journalist, many years myself, right, a long time ago, but that you want to ask that, you want to ask the questions, you want that story yourself, not what the doctor. So I always say that our media spokespeople are briefed, primed, and ready to answer essentially whatever is thrown at them. And I think that's absolutely the way it should be. I think that's the bedrock of our media integrity in this country.
It's transparent and democratic, and the more people in authority, so to speak, of which doctors are part of that trusted kind of senior echelon, the more we allow people to define their own narrative and to tell the people this is the way that it is. It makes it much harder for independent and objective critique and understanding. So that transparency is really important in a democratic society.
Yeah, I agree with all of that, guys. I think the one thing that I would add is that if you are building a relationship with journalists, so if you've not already got that relationship, then it can be beneficial to have some footage of your spokespeople to be able to evidence that they are a good quality, confident, clear speaker, because that can just give the confidence to the producers and the editors and the journalists that, okay, yes, I want to interview that person. So I think it's important to have some examples, just think, if you've got a new spokesperson or someone who is unknown to the media, then that can definitely be beneficial. But I completely agree. You can maybe film some cutaways and stuff like that, but I think the majority of it is going to be, we want people being held to account to an extent, don't we? And having that, as you guys have already explained. So, guys, I can't believe it's 10:59 already. So we are, bang up against it, and we've barely scratched the surface of these questions. So what we will do is we take those offline, and we will try and get those answered for you, and we get those emailed out to everybody. So really, it just remains for me to, first off, I'm going to thank everybody behind the scenes, not just the guys on screen, because there was a whole kind of team here in the offices here and also externally across the country, kind of pulling this together for us. And, we've had a fantastic take up of people coming along. So thank you to all of you guys, all the audience members, for joining us on this. And please do come along to the next one and the one after that as well. But Helen Robertson-Gordon, thank you ever so much. Tinny, Kami, it's been amazing having you there, and I've really enjoyed it, and I'm sure other people have. So thank you, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.